Zhu Yunlei, 1957, the son of Zhu Rongji and Laoan, graduated from the University of Wisconsin in 1994, the former CEO of CICC, and has been named 25 most influential business leaders in Asia for 3 consecutive times. This article is Zhu Yunlei's speech China's Development Road Under the New Normal at the Dean Forum of Tsinghua University School of Economics and Management. Full text of the speech. The so-called new normal should be a normal that is different from the past. Why mention the new normal? Probably because the old normal is no longer sustainable, otherwise there would be no need to mention the new normal. The ultimate goal of our economic development is to hope for the development of the country and the happiness of the people. Let us first look at the basic situation of China's development. This is a general description I made based on the yearbook data published by the National Bureau of Statistics in 2015. The land area of 9.6 million square kilometers is the basis for all our activities. We are a big country with a population of 1.37 billion, and the statistics of the total output value are 69 trillion yuan. In addition, there are many basic characteristics that everyone is familiar with, such as a long history, a vast land, a large population, hardworking and enterprising, coupled with reform and opening up, remarkable achievements, industrial development, complete categories, insufficient resources, overcapacity, excess inventory, and upgrade challenges, innovation challenges and more. This is a general situation. Look at the geography of China. I really like this picture, it can explain a lot of problems. Northeast China, North China, the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River, including the Pearl River Basin, are all plains. The northwest is a plateau, and Tibet is the highest here, the roof of the world. China is a 3-step terrace, the first step is a plain, the second step is a plateau, and the third step is the so-called roof of the world. Its geographical characteristics are called west, high, and low, with the southeast relatively warm and humid, and the northwest relatively dry. Among the total area of 9.6 million square kilometers, the eastern first-order plain covers nearly 2.81 million square kilometers. If you compare it with the whole world, the plain in China is the largest in the world. Europe also has a large plain, but its latitude is 50 degrees to the north, while the latitude of this plain in China is between 40 degrees in Beijing and 30 degrees in Shanghai, and the temperature and humidity conditions are much better than those in the European plain. Such geographical and climatic conditions are not only suitable for the growth of animals and plants, but also support our development for thousands of years. The approximate distribution of the population, the red area, is the most densely populated. Almost 93% of the people live here on about 1/3 of the country. Although we claim to have a land area of 9.6 million square kilometers, the core area is within more than 3 million square kilometers. Look at our urban-rural structure again. This is the statistical figure I found based on the 2015 Urban Construction Statistical Yearbook. The cities and counties across the country are the most basic statistical units. The city has an average area of more than 3,000 square kilometers and a population of 1.12 million. The smallest ones are called urban built-up areas, such as the urban districts of Beijing. There are about 600 cities in China. The population of urban built-up areas is only 390 million, and if the counties are counted, the total is only about 500 million. There are more than 100 million people in townships. Each town has an average area of 1.6 square kilometers, and the average population is 4,000 people. So when we say that urbanization has become urbanization, we have actually added a lot of water. The average population of townships is only 4,000, and the average population of counties and urban built-up areas is 90,000. This place has 590,000 people, which is not a concept of magnitude at all. More than 600 cities across the country are truly urbanized. So in total, only about 50,000 square kilometers within the 9.6 million square kilometers are cities, accounting for only about 4 to 5 thousandths of the country's land area. So the Chinese population lives in very concentrated places. If you add up the area of the entire countryside, the area of towns and townships, and the area of counties and cities, it is about 200,000 square kilometers, which is the size of the place where people actually live. Many people think that there is not enough land to build a house. How is this possible? It's not a matter of land at all. Area is the space for development, population is the basis for development, and output value is the actual result of development. East, west, north, south, I use this red line to draw, the so-called eastern and central areas are on the first step mentioned above, about 2.81 million square kilometers, with a population of 1 billion, nearly 3/4, and the output value accounts for 80%. If the policies of all provinces are the same, one-sided pursuit of GDP, all want to achieve high-speed growth, then only increase industrial investment or real estate investment, the effect will definitely not be good. What's more, those marginal areas have different natural conditions and population densities. Therefore, differentiated development strategies tailored to local conditions should be considered. Let's talk about the economic structure of the aggregate. GDP is the market value of all final products and services. It is a statistics of all economic activities based on different production units. It has three statistical methods. One is the production method. Simply put, it refers to the products of different industries, and the biggest ones are agriculture, industry, construction, and service industries. The second is the income method. The distribution results obtained by participating production units from the perspective of distribution, such as salary, national taxation, depreciation, profit, etc. The third is the expenditure method. The ones that are used more often are more closely related to economic life, such as consumption, investment, government spending, import and export, etc. This is our overall structure, and their figures should be quite the same GDP, but due to the statistical process, there will always be a little error, so the figures may be different, and it is only a few percentage points of error. By the way, this is data from 2015, which is the most recent. The production method data was 64 in 2014, 68 in 2015, and 74 in 2016, with an average annual growth rate of 7.5%. From this perspective, the proportion of life services in production data, such as education and medical care, is very low. Production, manufacturing, and transportation are also known as tertiary industries. This tertiary industry is not what everyone usually talks about, but mainly refers to steel production, grain planting, train transportation, etc. These services should belong to the concept of production services. Someone talked about a new point of view, saying that the production and service industry should be specially developed now. I think you wished that 85% of it would be the production and service industry, and it would be almost the same if you wanted to specially develop the life service industry. Income distribution is also a low proportion of labor wages and a high proportion of capital income. The enterprise is profitable, but the income of the enterprise belongs to capital income, and the income of laborers only accounts for 1/3 of the enterprise. This income is the income of 1.3 billion people. This is the income of business owners. This is the income of the government. Of course, it is a tax and income tax. Let's look at the economic structure. From 1978 to the present, the economic aggregate and the weight of individual quantities. This is import and export. In terms of the proportion, we had a period of development to a maximum of about 8% in 2007, and then dropped to only about 2%-3% now. The proportion of government expenditure is relatively average. The most important are two major changes. Since 1978, consumption has accounted for a maximum of about 52%, and it has gradually declined since 2002. On the contrary, the proportion of our investment has risen in a straight line, consumption has decreased by 10%, and investment has increased by 10%. Then look at our consumption structure. The total consumption is 179 trillion from 2003 to 2016, accounting for 31% of the output value of 576 trillion in the same period. Different colors distinguish urban disposable income, urban consumption expenditure, rural disposable income, and rural consumption expenditure. After 2013, the National Bureau of Statistics calculated urban and rural areas together. The proportion of consumption is very small, accounting for only 1/3. Our investment structure, 20 major industry standard classifications, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, supply chain, construction, wholesale and retail, transportation, catering, information services, finance, real estate, leasing, technology, public facilities, resident services, education, health, culture, social organizations, international organizations. Obviously, the manufacturing industry is the largest, because China itself is a big manufacturing country, Real estate is definitely second. Public facilities have also invested so much, and then transportation includes railways and roads. Investment in the 7 fields of mining, manufacturing, supply, construction, land, transportation, and public transportation accounted for 84% of the total, and investment in the 5 fields of resident life services, education, health, culture, and catering was relatively small, accounting for only 5% of the total. And other industries accounted for no more than 10%. This is the structure formed from 1978 to 2002. It was in this state from 2003 to now, and it was proposed to enter the new normal in 2012 and 2013, and it is still developing along this new normal. What is the main support for such a big investment concept? This is our production value, which is a bank loan. The sum of all kinds of creditors' rights in the bank's other deposit salary and liability sheet is actually its creditors' rights after taking out the loan, and the remaining part is to buy other people's bonds. Here is a total value of the construction industry. The ratio of debt to debt has been around 100%. The total scale of construction is very close to the total scale of debt. Such a large-scale construction is supported by debt, and the ratio of construction to production in 2000 was 100% or so, until now all the way to more than 200%. According to the size of GDP, it is a proportional relationship. GDP represents the total production scale of the year. Compared with the total construction scale of the year, the total construction scale is getting bigger and bigger, from doubling to doubling. This is its core issue. Construction relies on debt. The banking system collects deposits and then borrows money. In addition to loans, it buys other people's bonds, which is still debt. The total debt scale represented by it is so similar to the total construction scale. It is obvious that construction is supported by debt. The Statistical Yearbook of the National Bureau of Statistics has a fund flow statement. It took me more than 2 years to thoroughly read it, and a national balance sheet was deduced from it. No one has claimed to have done it yet. Based on these principles, it can be calculated. If 2002 is used as the basis, by 2016, because the latest fund flow statement is only up to 2014, and I don't have the latter, I made some estimates. Now the total assets are 843 trillion yuan, liabilities are 546 trillion yuan, and equity is 297 trillion yuan. In 2016, the GDP was 70 trillion yuan, which means that we have an output of 70 trillion yuan. The output is a bit like the total production and sales of the year, but the total assets are 800 trillion yuan, which is a very high ratio. If the balance sheet of this country is equivalent to integrating all the companies in China and treating it as a China Group Co., Limited, I call it CIMC for short. This is a large enterprise with assets of 800 trillion yuan, a world-class large enterprise. How efficient is it? Its return on equity, which used to be 9%, is now 6%. After 2002, there was a period of systematic reform, which may be called the reform dividend, but after 2007, it began to decline systematically. The return on assets used to be 3%, but now it has dropped to 2%. The turnover rate of assets is put together and divided by 10, and the turnover rate drops from 50% to 30%. With more investment and larger assets, the turnover rate will obviously drop. It is equivalent to the asset leverage ratio, which is also divided by 10, 260 to 280, which is equivalent to the current overall average asset liability ratio of 65%. In this way, we can see the trending problems of the entire economy. Let's take a closer look at these major components of the economy. One is consumption. We have income statistics for the whole of China. From here to here, the output value has doubled, the dispersible income is half of the property rights, and the salary accounts for half of the entire GDP. After spending so much, the remaining consumption balance is less than 10,000 yuan per person on average. This is the average of urban and rural areas. If the urban and rural areas are calculated separately, the average consumption of each person in the city is 10,000 yuan, and the average consumption of rural people is only 2,000 yuan. The average is 6,000 to 7,000 yuan, which is still very small. From the concept of accumulation, the accumulated household balance is about 150 trillion. If the figures before 2002 are deducted, it should be about 120 trillion now. Of course, these are nominal. The numbers are huge and are rising, including the average increase in production value and price, which is not so high if calculated according to real GDP. Many dialectical laws in the economy are related to the name. The overall output value or the basic structure of the industry, from the output of each of the 20 industries, we can see where the production structure is inclined. We count the financial statements of listed companies, and the total assets of these 20 different industries are almost 354 trillion. The economic structure can be seen from the overall distribution and ranking of each industry. DuPont analyzed several major elements, and the profit margin is 6.6%, and we calculated it as 7%, which is quite close. DuPont calculated a rate of return of 7.2%, we calculated a rate of return of 6%. Listed companies have slightly better returns. It's very strange here, the industrial profit margin is only 3.6%, and the return rate is only 5.1%, while the financial is 12.5%. This graph is our financial assets. Our financial liabilities are basically equal to our financial assets, with a difference of one international position. The total size of our financial assets was 48 trillion yuan in 2002. The final figure has not yet been revealed, but some figures have been figured out. According to this logic, if all the information that has been released is used for estimation, it should be 510 trillion now. When financial assets expand 10 times, it is also 10 times financial liabilities. I roughly chose two overall perspectives on how to look at future development. I think the top-level design is really important, but at least the bottom-level design must be done well. The top-level design is obviously a macro-level comprehensive balance consideration, but I think that the light synthesis is not enough. The top level and the bottom level must be combined, because it is actually a whole systemic problem, and there are many differences and connections between various systems. The one party and three committees are already decentralized enough, and many financial principles should be unified. In essence, it is a huge expansion of credit, from doubling to doubling. This kind of construction scale, driven by debt, must result in excess investment. Then there are excessive leverage, excess capacity, excess inventory, slowing growth, low profits, capital price inflation, and currency pressure, all of which come together. In such a large country, the situation in each place is different, but the unified GDP must be reported. There are 5 provinces whose GDP does not exceed 5%, and they are collectively called to talk. You said you don't need GDP, but you can't do without GDP. Why do you want GDP? What is the quality of GDP? GDP should have been an objective statistic of the results of market activities, but now we turn GDP into a target and emphasize that this target is the premise of all indicators. If you have a project, the bank evaluates that the project can repay the principal and interest, and has a good prospect. Of course, you should grant a loan. The problem is that you don't have such a project now, and the bank still needs to lend to you. The result must be that you cannot make money. In the short term, it seems that GDP has been raised, but in the long run, the quality of GDP will be very low. For example, in real estate, according to my research, the excess is very serious. Judging from the housing stock, the construction area of urban housing, plus those still under construction, has a per capita scale of about 30 square meters, which can at least meet the housing needs of 1 billion people. However, according to exaggerated urbanization statistics, the urban population is only over 700 million people. In fact, 80% of the urban population has an average housing of only 25 square meters. Of course, some people have an average housing area of 60 square meters. On average, it is now called 30 square meters per capita in urban areas. Now it is more than 30, and it is rising every year. From a macro point of view, the total amount must be in excess. And now the average house price is almost 7,000 to 8,000 yuan, but our per capita income is only 7,000 to 8,000 yuan. Do you want to buy a 30 square meter house for 30 years? Unless you don't eat or drink for 10 years. No matter how you calculate it, the value is completely wrong. Macroeconomics should be treated systematically, and regional economies should be treated differently. Our economic goal should be to let the common people have no worries about food and clothing, and at least we are still worrying about housing. So there should be an objective and systematic measure. It is very right to propose 3 reductions and 1 reduction now. A series of problems of enterprises must be solved, and let the market play an important and decisive role in the allocation of resources. I think this is the most critical core to solve the problem. The production capacity of steel is 1.2 billion tons, and the output is 800 million tons, which is 400 million tons more. The goal is to reduce 100 million tons in 3 years, and 30 million tons a year. Is it useful? After a while, real estate became hot again, and the steel mills must have followed suit. This is not something that is really formulated according to the market mechanism. The top-level design should not only consider the goals from above, but also consider the specific situation of each specific industry below, including the relationship between different industries. This is a systematic project that requires the establishment of a series of policies and systems. What is the concept of the so-called rural land transfer for farmers? In a village in the middle of a large plain, can the land be transferred? The real land transfer can only be around the big cities. A city with a side length of 1 or 2 kilometers is quite a lot. Even if the land can be transferred, how many people can be solved? What use can it be to a farmer who lives in a real country? So such a policy cannot solve the essential problem. We mentioned earlier that consumption only accounts for 1/3 of GDP. If we think about this issue in reverse, 50% is basically investment. If we don't pursue GDP, we don't need to invest a lot of investment. The money spent to ensure the basic life of residents is only 30 trillion out of 70 trillion. If the market mechanism is allowed to play a decisive role and all investments that should not be made are stopped, the lives of ordinary people across the country will not be worse than last year. We should calm down and carefully review where there are too many votes. Don't always feel that it is pressure, always thinking about what to do once it drops to 5%, and what to do if it drops to 3%. In fact, it doesn't matter if it falls to half. I have enough food and drink, and I have all the basic necessities of life. It's just a delay of improvement, but it won't be worse than before. The basic life is guaranteed, and then it is adapted to local conditions. The core issue is that we should change the mode of economic development. We can no longer rely on investment and exports in the past. What can only be driven by 2%? We must truly promote reform and solve practical problems. To improve technological innovation, this is the core competitiveness of future development. The special situation of China's fiscal system is that many taxes are raised according to the central tax revenue, and part of the money is transferred back to the local governments. In fact, it is fiscal revenue plus central transfer fiscal revenue. The sum of the two is just equal to the fiscal expenditure, which is the basic balance of a local finance. Then there is the income of the residents, and the consumption of the residents. The 5 provinces of Shandong, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Guangdong, and Henan exceeded 3 trillion yuan, with an average of more than 2 trillion yuan. All in all, it is a concept, and my thinking is, first of all, the common people live and work in peace and contentment without worrying about food and clothing. To give an example, Heilongjiang covers an area of 470,000 square kilometers and has a population of more than 40 million. It has a large area of cultivated land and rich oil and forestry resources. Isn't it necessary to provide food, clothing, housing, and transportation for these 40 million people? If you insist on engaging in industry here, are you staying away from the market? In Jiangsu and Zhejiang, including Shandong, there is already a mess and excess of industrially developed industries. What else can it do? Agriculture accounts for 6% of GDP, but the growth of agriculture is only 2%. What can agriculture grow? So we can only do investment, and investment has increased production capacity, and the distance from the mainland is so far away. If a local official is set with a goal that the average GDP development level of the local area is the same as that of the whole country, he can only engage in industry, and there will be no way out for developing industry on the spot. In fact, there are other resources such as tourism in the local area. Why can't the local area take its own characteristic development path? Chinese people also need to go out to cool off in summer, go to see ice flowers in winter, and there are many other ways of consumption. My logic is that only by raising the income level of ordinary people can they have money to spend. Now it's not that I don't want to consume, but because I earn too little money. Our salary income accounts for less than half of GDP. Among the G7 countries, the lowest is Japan, whose national income accounts for 60%-70% of GDP. The proportion of our income is too low, and a lot of it has become the income of the country, and the country takes a lot of investment, but this kind of investment is easy to make mistakes. If the money is in the hands of the common people know what they want best, and when everyone consumes, there will be demand, and companies will invest according to the demand, completely let the market decide, and make the market economy more benign. Regarding the concept of one belt, one road, I have ranked the area, population, and output value of the world. The world's land area is 130 million square kilometers, and China's is 9.6 million square kilometers. The world's per capita output value is $10,000, and China's $8,000. The per capita output value of countries along the Belt and Road is half of ours, which is relatively less developed, but its total volume is quite large. The countries along the Belt and Road are 5 times our size, more than twice our population, and half our per capita output. The concept is that there are more than 60 countries along the Belt and Road, with an area 4.4 times that of ours, a population 2.3 times that, and an output value 1.4 times that of ours. From the perspective of the enterprise, isn't it equivalent to expanding our market scope by about 2 times? I think this idea is quite far-sighted. Relatively speaking, we are a little more advanced than them, and our output value is almost double that of theirs. Made in China still has a certain strength, but we are already worried about its overcapacity in China. At least we can expand in such a large international field. Of course, it will not automatically belong to you, it needs us to compete. We should believe that we have a competitive advantage. This requires us to do it one by one in a very specific way, and we need to have a strong pioneering ability. This is a picture made by American Macroeconomic Research, and it has been able to reach the present from such an ancient time as the first year of AD. Our GDP has always accounted for more than a quarter of the world. In fact, we only have a plain of more than 3 million square kilometers, and we have relied on the economies of scale of agriculture for a long time, so we can be so powerful. This country has a 10% tax and is already very rich. If 10% of the soldiers are collected, it will be tens of millions of troops. Because of this, no one can beat the country unless it is itself corrupt. The change of dynasties in China happens to be the same. It can be seen why this logic suddenly fails here. It dropped from 33% to almost zero all at once. What happened to China? What has been done wrong has caused us to suddenly change from a great country to a poor country and even a miserable life. You see that India is actually higher than us, but how did it come down? It started with the East India Company, and then it was basically the same as us. On this picture, I found that India was accidentally placed here. The plains of India are also very large, and the average elevation ranges from 30 to 20. This is the difference between Shanghai and Guangzhou. The southern part of India has good humidity and temperature, so it produces more. In an age based on agriculture, its crop yields have been consistently high, even higher than ours. Our latitude is higher than it, so the output is slightly less than it, which may be one of many reasons. Another reason is that it was first invaded by the so-called Yadian, so its history and culture have many cross-changes. However, due to the limitation of terrain, China is surrounded by high mountains on 3 sides. In the cold weapon era of the ancient agricultural period, it was basically isolated from the world. There is also a very subversive statement about the construction of the Great Wall. In the past, we all know that the Great Wall was built in various dynasties. First, our agriculture was too rich at that time, and it was nothing to spend a little money to build a city wall. Second, nomads did often come to harass and rob us, so we really needed to build the Great Wall to protect our rich land. Property. Compared with ensuring a quarter of the world's output value, the cost of building the Great Wall is relatively cost-effective. This picture mainly shows that because of the Industrial Revolution, we fell behind, so we fell down all of a sudden. But this line has risen again later. Why is this? We collapse because there is no industry, and rapid industrialization is one of the most important tools for revitalization and re-emergence. China's modern industrialization process began in 1949. At that time, 100 projects were imported from the Soviet Union. After the Soviets withdrew, we continued to do it ourselves. At that time, we knew very well that China could not even produce soap and flour machines, but we must seize 2 bombs and 1 star, which was the most extreme advanced technology back then. China used to rely on spears and knives, plus some martial arts, but when foreigners started the Industrial Revolution, they used strong boats and guns, and our advantages disappeared immediately. I have such a logic. In the past, it was a one-to-one war with cold weapons. At that time, there were 400 million people in China, and there were only about 10 million people in the UK. You have 100 swordsmen. Multiply 100 times by 10 million, and they become 1 billion people. Can we beat it? This is called the technology multiplier. When the technology multiplier is changed from 1 to 100, the power balance is reversed, and China suddenly fell down. We are catching up now. The technology is not yet as good as they are, but we have caught up a lot. In the past, our multiplier was 0, but now, to be modest, it is 60 to 70%. Even if it is 70%, 1 billion people are multiplied by 7. Even if we have not reached 100%, 70% is completely different from before. The problem is now it's 1 and we're at 0.7 and we're still catching up. But tomorrow he has another new invention, tomorrow is 2, or 1.5, we may go back to 0.6. We used to talk about independent intellectual property rights, which meant designing and manufacturing by ourselves, and being self-reliant. However, the foundation of a country must be science and technology, so I would like to emphasize what is called a technology multiplier. We must develop our own real technology. What does China's future depend on? By reform, including a series of institutional reforms. We have a good opportunity to expand the Belt and Road and the world market. We can peacefully occupy a certain market through market economic exchanges, and it is also a support for the development of these countries and people's lives. I just mentioned the technology multiplier. The front is technology, and the back is talent. With these two items, we have a bright future ahead of us. I say this to be modest. I think it should be invincible in the world.